Hello, and welcome back to Gate Show Crafts. I'm Sarah, and today I'm here with my neighbor, Izzy Provencha.
Hello.
Thanks for coming down.
Thanks for having me.
Izzy is a Vermonter. How long has your family lived in Vermont?
I'm only fourth generation.
Okay, only fourth. So,
but I have part of my family goes back 8.
That's amazing.
I can find them in the 1830 census, but they're not.
Right.
It's like my great grandfather's wife, but
you know, we try to keep up. So Izzy's lived here for a long time and knows about making maple syrup, which is a video I've been wanting to do for a long time. So thanks for lending your expertise.
You're welcome.
And Izzy's dog is outside and is sad that he's not outside. So if you hear a dog howling, there's no cruelty being done. We're going to get to the dog after the video's over. But yeah, I thought we'd talk about maple sugaring. And I actually got to go see Izzy sugar at his friend's sugar house a couple of weeks ago. And we'll intersperse some footage while we're talking about the process. So I guess the first thing is you tap the trees, right?
Yep.
There's different methods or technologies that people have been using over the centuries to do this.
Yep.
So
started off with like the old days is they started off with like a wood shoot. Basically, so you take a tree and you'd carve a piece out and then you jam it in and then put a bucket, and then it evolved into like the more modern spiles, which is kind of what you kind of think of when you think of a maple tap,
right?
With wood buckets, with wood covers, and then it went to English tin, and so the spile kind of remained the same, and it went to English tin with a cover, and then of course now we're to piping. Right. So plastic lines, which make it a lot easier, and then that varies considerably. So we use like a 5/16, or excuse me, a 7/16. Some people use 5/16 for the taps. Some people use nubs. There's vacuum. It can get super complex.
Right. And so these, I'm sorry, say the word again.
Spiles, yeah. Those are the kind of the traditional.
Like
they have the little hook
spigots, and they have a hook to hang your bucket
on.
Right,
exactly.
So you're literally putting a spigot directly into the tree to get the sap to run.
And the Indians, I guess, used to like drill a hole in the tree and then just drink the sap.
Oh, okay.
And that like boiling it down was a kind of European thing.
Sure.
So kind of, I don't know, but I don't know about that. So.
Industrializing different processes.
Yeah.
And it's seasonal. And it sap usually starts running in February. I know this year was unusual.
Yep.
So you're out there when it's the tail end of winter. It's usually a kind of cold, wet weather. Often you're waiting. If you're collecting buckets, you're wading through snow that can be knee deep.
Or more.
waist
deep in spots this year.
Yeah. We had a lot of snowpack this year. So, but I think for Vermonters that do this, it's like spring is finally coming. It's sugaring season, and yes, the weather's nasty, but darn it, I'm going to get out there anyway and do something because I've got cabin fever. I've been inside all winter, and this is like the first good physical activity and getting outside.
Yep, and the way I figure it is that January's the worst month.
Sure.
February is the shortest month, and February we begin sugaring, and by the time we're done sugaring, which is usually now, mid to late April, spring is sprung.
Right.
Yeah, and so it's psychologically, mud season sucks, I think.
It's terrible. So there's a lot of activities that Vermonters do in mud season, and you have to keep yourself entertained. We'll talk about entertainment in the sugar shack in a little bit. So that's kind of the cycle. This year was really late. We had a long, late winter. And you need certain temperatures for the sap to start running, right? Warm days and cold nights.
Right. So generally speaking, it all depends. So there's a lot of factors: wind, snowpack, sun exposure. So if you have a southern-facing sugar bush as opposed to a north-facing sugar bush, but generally speaking, the rule of thumb is 28 degrees at night, 40 to 45 during the day. But that doesn't always. The wind's blowing hard, or it's cloudy, or whatever. It can vary considerably. If there's snowpack around the base of the trees, that has an effect on it too. And with our trees, I've learned that don't bother trying to figure it out. Just
go see if it's running.
Yeah. Our trees are pretty unpredictable. So
And so then we talked about going from the taps to this tubing. So you would have permanent, or you would tap the trees. Do you tap them afresh every year anyway? And then hook up the lines.
Yep.
And then typically your sugar bush is uphill from your sugar house. And so the sap runs down through these lines and directly into your holding tank.
Correct.
And then you boil your maple syrup off of that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we used gravity. So
Okay.
we just, nature, it creates a natural vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
So guys have what are called sap suckers. So they
Mm-hmm.
actually have vacuum that pulls it, which so they can get more than we can because we're just waiting for Mother Nature to do her thing.
Right.
And they're taking the initiative.
Is there any, I mean, other than volume of production, obviously, or getting like a faster yield, is there any harm to the tree to do that?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
The rule of thumb is you never tap where above or below an old tap because there's veins in the tree.
Sure.
So you always kind of move left or right.
Around.
But as far as I can tell, we have maple trees that are well over 100 years old and they clearly have been tapped many, many times. And they still produce.
Yeah.
And each tree's different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. I love it. In some of the restaurants around here, you can go in and they'll have like a side table or something that's a slice of an old maple tree that had to come down, and you can see all the tap marks, all the infiltrations.
And that's like super
angles.
Trendy right now, which is really interesting because like even 10 years ago, that's junk.
Mm-hmm.
And nowadays people think, which it is cool. It's cool to
it's the history of the tree.
Exactly.
That's really cool. Let's taste, I don't want to over sugar us, so let's taste some maple syrup while we're talking. I guess we'll start with, this is this year's yield from the sugar house where we had our little tour. So let's try this one. Definitely smells mapley.
Delightful.
Yeah.
I'm biased.
It's thick. Really coats your tongue. Definitely sweet, but I've got a lot of that caramel, that kind of candy flavor. And
I think that's because we do not have an RO, which is a reverse osmosis. So what that does is it takes the water out of the sap. So it raises the sugar level basically, so less time boiling. So I'd argue because we boil more, we get more caramelization, more maple flavor.
Absolutely.
That's my theory, at least.
Well, no, that makes complete sense because I've made candy before from just cane sugar.
Right.
And the more you cook it, the more caramel you get.
Exactly.
So it makes sense with maple. Yeah, so let's talk about the actual sugaring process. So you've got it out of the tree into a holding tank. And then you typically would wait until that tank's a certain depth before you fire up the fire because that's a whole process.
Right, because that's what we call burning the pans, which basically if the syrup gets too hot, it'll turn to candy. And then you burn your pans, and that's a really bad day.
Right.
So what we try to do is we try to have at least 150 gallons. 150 gallons will last us, that's probably 4 hours worth of boiling.
Okay.
And so do you want me to talk about how the actual system works?
Yeah.
So what we have is we have a holding tank out behind the sugar house, and then we have a 3/4 inch copper line that comes in and goes through the back pans, and that's a preheater. So when the sap comes in, it's ice cold. But by the time it hits the float box, it is red hot.
Preheated,
and so the idea is that, of course, there's less time boiling. And so then what we have, so as the sap becomes more viscous, as it becomes thicker, it travels. It naturally travels. So the heavier stuff moves forward. So what we'll do is we have a big back pan. Our back pan is 4 feet. We have a 2x6 wood-fired evaporator. So our back pan is what they call drop flue. So there's these little flues, fins, which basically allow fire to go down the sides. And what that does is creates a deeper boil. Right. And what happens?
More surface area because you've got a hot fin, and then the sap is between each of these.
Exactly. And we also have a blower, which is blowing the fire even hotter to expedite that process.
Like a bellows,
Yeah. And so then what happens is on the front pan, which is a 2x2, that's a flat pan. That's our finishing pan. And as it becomes more syrup, so obviously we're boiling out the water and it's becoming more sugar, which so literally if you boil it down, you get sugar.
Right.
Yeah, eventually, which probably most people know. But
crystals,
Yeah, exactly. And so what happens is you have 3 slots, and in each one of those slots you have different levels of syrup. And so the final slot, which is where our thermometer is where the final product is. And of course, water boils at 212 degrees. Syrup is made at 219.
Yeah.
I think sugar on snow is it's 222, and sugar's 232 or whatever. So we have a temperature gauge, and what we do is when that hits 7, so it starts at 212 degrees.
Boiling point of water.
Right. And then goes to 7, which is 219 degrees. And when that hits there, what we do is we open the valve and we open the back pans. What happens is it pushes everything through. So that front pan in theory is full of syrup, and maybe the second section is too. And as we release the back pan, it pushes
the gravity of the hot sap or the hot tree sap coming in pushes out the maple syrup.
Right.
And then you watch your thermometer and then you know when to shut it off.
Exactly. And so when it drops,
draw it off. You've drawn off the
maple
syrup. Yeah.
And it depends. Sometimes we can do a gallon, 2-gallon draw off. Sometimes we do a quart. It all depends on the sugar content, what was in the pan before.
Right. We talked about reverse osmosis, raising the content of the sugar by drawing off water through the reverse osmosis process. But out of the tree, you're looking at what, 2%?
Yeah. So people, I've heard of, some guy told me 8% this year, which I would have to see that to believe it. I don't buy that.
4 times as concentrated.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's one of those things where, like, was there ice on top? Because what happens is the water freezes and the sugar doesn't. So sometimes if you take it on the bottom, the sugar goes up. It's a little misleading.
Right. Okay.
I've heard verified 6%.
Yep.
Which those are super high. So the rule of thumb, it's like the rule of 86 or something like that. So basically, it's at 2%, 40 gallons of sap technically 43 gallons of sap for 1 gallon of syrup.
Okay.
So if you double that, so if your sugar content's 4%, now it's 20 gallons, and that increases your efficiency. But on average, I'd say 2% is pretty standard. That's what we were running most of the time, 2 to 2.5.
Okay. And then with the reverse osmosis, I think I heard your brother tell me there was about up to 16%.
Some people, if you have enough posts, can get up to 26%.
Wow.
I know people that run at 26%.
Yeah. So then you're cooking it less time because you start with a concentrated sugar solution, and then you're getting less of that caramelization.
Exactly. Which is what I'd argue makes it taste different.
Yeah. Well, I think it tastes better. But on the other hand, depending on how much energy you spent doing the RO process, it might be more energy efficient to do it that way.
Yes.
You're burning less wood or less
fuel.
And
we, on average, boil 8 to 9 hours when we boil. And so we both are teachers, so we get done school.
Yep. Usually
get up there, start the fire around 4 o'clock, sometimes 3 o'clock, and we're usually there at midnight.
Yeah.
And people with RO are there for 3-4 hours, half to quarter of the time. Yep. I would argue that why would you want to be out of the sugar house? But,
right. Because it's a communal thing, and I've been to other sugar houses where families take it in shifts. Like somebody will get the fire started mid-afternoon, and then they'll take a dinner break, and then Dad will come in with a case of beer and some new recruits, and they'll stoke the fire for a while because you have to stoke the fire fairly constantly. It's about every 10 minutes.
7 to 8 minutes.
Yeah.
It all depends on what you're burning.
Right.
How hot your coals are, that kind of stuff. But generally, 7 to 8 minutes.
Yeah. So you keep loading logs into the firebox underneath the pans constantly and monitoring the temperature, and somebody's got to be over there when you're getting close monitoring that, and then
right. And you should always keep your eye on it because sometimes the gauge isn't right. Sometimes if you're back in your front pan, if the back section of your front pan's getting a little syrupy, sometimes maybe there's something with the float valve. Sometimes you have
something got clogged further up the chain,
right? Yeah. Or sometimes you have bubbling, so it requires constant monitoring.
Yeah.
At least in our system. I mean, people with all the fancy stuff like steam away and hoods and all that, they just sit there. But we keep busy.
Push a button.
Yeah.
Who wants to do that? All right. Let's taste. This is another local syrup. I'm not exactly sure where it's from. I got this at our local co-op, and I can tell you that it is thinner.
It's good though.
I mean, it's sweet, and it has more. It has a more tree characteristic to me. This has more wood in it. This, I think, has more cooked candy taste.
I would agree.
Yeah, they're both really good. So then from there, we're almost done making maple syrup. So we've got to the point where we're reaching our 219 degrees, and we open up the valve, and
so we draw off into a pan, and what we have is we have filters. So they're cloth filters. The fancier operations have filter presses, which are much more high tech. Right. But basically, for lack of a better way to describe it, how my buddy always describes it, you have niter, and it's essentially sand that comes.
Oh, okay.
So it's a very fine sand. He describes it as maple tree poop. that's how he describes it to kids, which, you know, in their minds makes sense. It's kind of an interesting way of thinking about it.
Right.
So a niter, it's black, it's jet black.
Mm-hmm.
It's, like I said, super fine sand. It's
Mm-hmm.
literally, it's found within the tree. And so what we do is we just make sure, sometimes depending, some runs there's heavier niter, sometimes there's not. And we just filter it.
Filter
just
that out.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that must be the chemicals the minerals.
Yep, that's exactly
because
what it is.
Because the trees soak up vitamins and minerals, and minerals are, you know, they're heavy, they're metal, they're these components. So, yeah, it makes sense that would be in the sap. I hadn't thought about that. Yep.
So we, you know, and there's days where we have to change the filter every draw off.
Mm-hmm.
There's days where you can get 5 or 6 draw offs, and I don't really know what makes the niter.
I think it's one of those things where it's the same as the saffron. You know, it's going to be the climate, it's going to
be
the tree, what the soil's doing that year, blah, blah, blah.
That's what I figured. But then, of course, we can it. So we usually can, because we're smaller, so we don't usually get a gallon draw off. So and people don't actually really like gallons, believe it or not.
They're hard to use unless you use a lot of maple syrup.
Right.
What I was told was to put them into smaller
glass
jars, or plastic jugs are okay, and put them in the freezer.
Yep. Yeah.
And then, because the maple syrup doesn't actually freeze, but it does keep it fresh tasting longer, and then you can pour some into a smaller container, because it will still run even if it's been frozen.
Yep. And so we do half gallon. We do quarts. We do a lot of half gallons. We do some quarts. We do some pints. And then all we do is, you know, you just go to Welch's. Welch's is the hardware store. Yeah. You buy the containers, and then we just fill them to the top, and they have like a built-in cover, and because it's hot, when you screw it on, we turn it on its side, and the heat from the syrup creates a seal. And we put stickers on it. We grade them too. We should talk about grading.
Oh, yeah.
So there is a system of grading. So there are, there's 3 now. Or there's 4. There used to be 5. There's 3 now. There used to be 4. And so what happens is you buy a grading kit every year, and it has 3 little bottles and an empty one, and it has the different grades. So they're made, I don't know, like January each year. Right. And what you do is you hold them up into the sun, and depending on the color, will give you a sense of what the grade is. I still go by the old labeling system.
We had grade A, grade B, and grade C, which was commercial grade for baking or
blackstrap,
or making molasses, which is not really the same thing.
And then there's fancy, and there's grade A medium, grade A dark, and B, that's the old ones. And now they describe them more in terms of flavor, like rich amber or something like that.
Robust amber. Yeah.
I don't know.
Sweet. So
we still, because we're cheap, and we have all the labels from the old kind. We still use the old labels.
Yeah. Well, and you guys are just basically sugaring for yourselves, so you don't have to be in this. The reason that Vermont, my understanding is the reason Vermont changed the way that they label their syrup is to be in line with Canada, which also makes a lot of syrup, and we wanted to be able to compare apples to apples, maple syrup to maple syrup, in the international maple syrup markets. But around here people still say, "Oh, that's fancy. That's or that's grade B or whatever." But it's basically lighter in color. I would say more fluid, sweeter, less flavorful.
I would agree. And the reason why it's lighter is because there's less caramelization, because usually it's made out of a higher sugar content. Right. Not always true though. Right. Sometimes it varies, and I don't.
Yeah. Well, and you also told me that some people don't cook their syrup on wood.
Right. But there's a lot of oil fired for more commercial.
They use oil fired for commercial, which is, again, probably, speeding up the process thing, or like having to hire less people to stoke fires than somebody to sit there and push a button and the furnace turns on.
It's boring.
But A, you're using fossil fuels, and B, you're not cooking your syrup as long, and C, you're not getting the wood smoke flavor in your maple syrup. So I don't think it has as much flavor.
And in terms of like thinking more environmentally, what we do in terms of our sugar wood comes from our sugar bush. So what we do is we cut down trees, like an ash tree that's leaning against the maple, or we thin out our sugar bush in order to allow those maple trees to grow. Right. And then the stuff we cut down, which is like basswood and cherry, and there's a lot of that where we are in ash, that becomes... That in turn makes the maple syrup.
So you're managing the forest. You're cutting down invasive species. Like some of the cherry that grows around here is not native, and it tends to choke out other native species. So yeah, you're managing the forest. You're creating a nice environment for the wild animals that live there and all that. Speaking of species, we can trace this final syrup. So this one is a little different. My neighbor down the street he does maybe a gallon and a half just for his family's use, and he usually gives us a small jar as a holiday gift. And so this is red maple. So this is a different species than what they use commercially. My understanding is it's not as sweet and it's not as productive, and so it's commercially not as viable. But it's still a very edible.
I've never had it.
Syrup.
It almost has like a liqueur finish, but start and then finishes like a regular maple syrup. I don't know. It's unique.
Yeah, it has a different taste, more minerally. I would say after it kind of goes out of your mouth, you get that residual minerally flavor.
It's interesting. Better than Aunt Jemima.
Corn syrup. Don't buy corn syrup.
Nope.
Although that is what I grew up on. I'm ashamed to say. When I was a little kid, unlike Izzy has, how old is Harrison? 2?
He'll be 2 in July.
Okay, yeah. Izzy's got a little boy who's growing up on maple syrup the right way.
Yeah.
But my mom waited. I think she waited until I was 6 and then tried to give me maple syrup after I'd had corn syrup. And I was like, oh.
Yeah, right. You couldn't make it.
It has a flavor. I don't like it.
Harrison, we tried to give him pancakes last Saturday, and he didn't want to eat the pancakes. He just wanted the maple syrup. So he literally pushed the pancakes out of the way and grabbed the jug. So
yeah.
I guess we're raising him right.
When you grow up in the sugar house.
Yep.
And we have to talk about one other sugar house tradition, at least at least in your sugar house. As he introduced me, do you want to tell me about the cocktail, the time-honored cocktail that we have?
So it's called the Hot Maple Gobbler, and I have to admit it's not a tradition that we originated. So it comes from my brother's father-in-law is a maple sugar maker.
Okay.
Has been, his father and his grandfather, generations of maple makers. So it came from their sugar house. But the Hot Maple Gobbler, so what we do is, especially when we have guests, is we buy the little, they look like red Solo cups, but they're about yay big. And we pour a shot of wild turkey whiskey and a shot of hot maple syrup. So usually not directly off the evaporator because it's a little too hot. Right. But
not your tongue.
But it's got to be hot enough for it. And then we shoot them. We shoot the whiskey and you chase it with the syrup and you don't even taste the whiskey. You
forget all about the whiskey.
Right. I think we went through 3 bottles of whiskey this year.
Okay.
And 5 boils.
Yeah.
So
that's not bad.
Yeah. I mean, it's not 2 of us. There's guests.
No. There's many guest appearances. There were several guests when I was there too.
Yeah, and we had this year. We only boiled 5 times, and we had a couple. Well, at least once, 22 people in the sugar house, and our sugar house is 16 by 20. So So there's usually when we're boiling, there's a constant flow because that's to us, that's a huge part of it. It's community, it's family, it's fun, and we invite our colleagues. We invite. Send mass text out to hey, we're boiling. Yeah. You want to come down? Yeah. Do a shift? Yeah. Or at least come tell me a good story while I'm sitting here tending this fire. Exactly. Sugaring sucks if you do it by yourself. Yeah. It's not fun at all. Long hours, lonely. Yeah, I could see that. I mean, I do know a couple of guys who like to kind of sugar either just with their buddies or kind of by themselves because it's my alone time. I don't have to do other chores. I'm doing this one important thing and nobody's bothering me. But most people, it's a social experience. Very much. Yeah. I think, and again, there's no better way to kill mud season. That's right. The smell of that. And Yep. Being in the hot steam when it's cold and. Right. Your skin's been dry all season long. It's not, and it's not, sometimes it's not cold enough to snow. So you get wintry mixed glop outside. Right. Which is the worst. Really miserable, but you're inside and boiling next to the. Yeah. It's good. Smells good. Feels good. It's good. Yep. Yeah. It's great. So I do encourage you, if you can make it up to Vermont through the mud in mud season and get yourself a tour of a real sugar house, do that or check in your area. I mean, I know people sugar all along the northern part of this country and certainly all across Canada if you're in Canada. So, and I think usually a 3rd or 4th weekend of March is open sugar house day. So basically most sugar houses are boiling and you can just show up and hang out, and you
Check
can
it out.
bounce. You can go to different sugar houses. Usually
Right.
people have signs up that say,
yeah,
come on in. So
it's kind of like open studio weekend here in the fall for the artists.
Exactly.
But that's really cool. And there are some sugar houses in Vermont that are open year round for tours. They're not making maple syrup because it's not the season, but you can go and taste their maple syrup and learn about the process. So that's another fun one, especially if you're in the area and you have kids and you want something kind of educational or fun to do. So we'll link to a couple of places in case you're interested in taking a tour. So thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun. Got to drink some maple syrup.
It's always good. It's good because we've also invited Izzy to come over and help us muck the barn. So, a few calories and some sugar to get us going.
Probably wouldn't have so much enthusiasm if you did it afterwards.
That's right. I don't want to drink sugar. I just want to nap. Anyway, thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.